Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this version of the Act ASAP podcast. Today, I am proud to introduce Brad and Kiera Newbury. Brad and Kiera are both first responders or have a first responder history, and right now they're wandering off in a different path to enlighten people about things that they can do with themselves. So Brad, Kiera, why don't you just tell us who you are and why you got into what you're doing?
Sure. So I've been in fire and EMS now for over 40 years. I'm an educator where we actually, as an educator and an entrepreneur, we run one of the largest EMS education schools in the country. One of these, I'm not sure where we stand compared to others, but we do have a large EMT and paramedic program, and we're out of Massachusetts. And since several years ago, I've been involved in not only just fire and EMS, but in education. And we started to think about some of the challenges that out of hospital cardiac arrest brought to not only the victims, but also some of the individuals that may have been standing next to those people who went into cardiac arrest. And then really who could help and how could they
Well,
help?
that's very interesting because that's exactly the type of things I want to get into. You sound like the man with the plan there. Tell me, Kira, what about you? What got you involved in this whole industry?
So I, from a young age, have always been surrounded by EMS, given that both my parents opened up this school that teach EMT and paramedics. And when I was very young, I was brought into this world, and all of the students kind of took me under their wing, exposing me to their cultures and teaching me the stuff that they had just learned. And there was a point in my life, I was 8 years old, when I had looked up to my older siblings. I'm the youngest of three, and I knew that they had found their position and their purpose within the world of EMS, and I knew that I needed to find that too. And at 8 years old, there wasn't much that I could do. So I went to my dad and I said, I want to be an EMT and I want to be an EMT now. And he said, no, I don't think that they're going to allow that. So after a little pushback, I had gone onto our family computer and I found that there was no minimum age requirement to become certified in CPR. And at that point in my life, I knew that just this one small training could change multiple lives in the future. And so I did it. I went through the training at 8 years old, and I received my CPR card, but I knew then that the card wasn't what mattered. It was my education. And I became an EMT when I turned 18, and I started working in a level 1 trauma center in Boston, and I got to see the effects of that. And then my dad brought me this project, and I have been so blessed to be able to work on it with him, and I've learned so much, and I've got to share these stories, which are so close to my heart.
Well, that sounds good. It sounds like what I just heard you say that the EMS community in its own way is like a big family in a lot of ways. Well, that's good. There's a combined will to do things, so therefore you want to be connected with the people who have that type of will. So let's go to your book. You got a couple books out there. The First Responder Advantage, and then the upcoming book, you're The Saved Effect. So I'm interested in The Saved Effect. Of course, I haven't read it yet because it's not available yet. But why don't you tell me about it? Why did you write it, and what's so special about it right now?
So the idea has came to me for years. I've been teaching our paramedic students and more so, I have a talk that I give at graduation, and the name of it is "What does it mean to be what does it mean to be a paramedic?" But then a subtopic of that is what does it mean to save a life? And I tell this story about this individual, Frank, who's in the book, and his whole story is in our book, and how I was involved in Frank's resuscitation in 1994. And then Frank lived another, and he was awake and alert when we left him. We defibrillated him 5 times on the way to the hospital. And by the time we left him, he was awake and alert and talking to his family. And through some interesting circumstances that we unpack in the book, Frank lived another 25 years post resuscitation.
Right.
And
So
and you
it's
know
time to go yet. That's all there is, right?
it wasn't his time to go yet, but it's not just the moment that in which he was saved. It's the arc of time that came later. And I use a metaphor in the book where I talk about throwing a pebble. My son threw a pebble in the pond, and it kind of created these ripple effects. And have you ever heard of the butterfly effect, Daniel?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So Kiera had this brilliant idea when I brought this to her about these stories, and not only some stories that I was involved in, but some other stories that we knew about of individuals who had been saved in out of hospital cardiac arrest, and some that where bystander intervention made a huge difference, including my own father.
Mhm.
And so I went to Kiera and we started talking about some of these stories, and I said, listen, I think I need to write this down. I need to write this book. And I had a different name for it. And I said, and Kira has a minor in writing from college. So she has a degree in, and I'll let her unpack that, but she also she's a gifted writer. And I saw that when we were in college because her professors would invite us as parents to come in and see their oral presentations of their writing. So I knew that she had this talent. And so I invited her into this project and said, hey, would you be interested in this? And at first she kind of rejected me, which was funny in itself, but then she really bought into what I was trying to accomplish. And Kira came to me and she said, hey, Dad, have you ever heard of the butterfly effect? And like you, Daniel, I actually hadn't heard of the movie and I hadn't heard of and she said, because I'm not a movie guy. So she tells me in just a couple of sentences, what does the butterfly effect mean? And really it's a theoretical effect of, say, a butterfly in South America flaps its wings and the ripple effect of that breeze. Where does that breeze go and what does that breeze do? And eventually maybe it creates a tornado in Oklahoma, right? So there's this kind of ripple effect, or, I liken it back to even though I said I'm not a movie guy, I was a movie guy in the 80s, but in the 90s, you go back to like Back to the Future, right? When Michael J. Fox was, goes back into the future. And if he does anything to disrupt whatever's going on in the moment could change and have a ripple effect to the future. Well,
You
she came
know,
to me.
it's interesting. My 3 decades in Florida, every hurricane season, I'd wonder what that butterfly looked like.
Yes. Well, and so the title, The Saved Effect, Kira came to me and she said, hey, Dad, and she asked me this and she said, these stories are just like the butterfly effect, but these people were saved. How about we call it the saved effect? And honestly, I thought that was brilliant, right? Because there is an effect when someone is saved from an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest or a choking, and then what ripples are created after? And where would those ripples have stopped if that individual had died that day? And it's interesting because the premise of the book is not only just wrapped around the effect of what happened and the ripple effect of that, but these are real human stories. And you think about there's the story of Uncle Frank. He lived 25 more years. He got to see his children, he got to see his children's children, right? He got to see his grandchildren. He got to raise them. He got to be with his kids during some of the toughest times in their lives. And we kind of unpack that in the book that if he had died that day, none of that would have continued. And there's a wonderful story of my dad in there who suffered an out of hospital cardiac arrest. And two bystanders stepped in. He was at a dance recital in the parking lot leaving, and he dropped in the parking lot. And two bystanders stepped in and worked as a team to start CPR, and then fire and EMS came in and they resuscitated him fully neurologically intact. And
Well,
he went
that's
on to
interesting.
continue to live.
We don't often think about the individual on the sidewalk or in the street actually being competent enough to help, but we've learned that that is not necessarily true. Now, one of my premises is when I train an individual, a family, is you are your own first responder until help arrives. So, with
Mhm.
that thought process, what does that really mean for the average family, and what can an average family do to ensure that if they have to be that first responder, they're capable?
I could take this one. I think that one of our greatest capabilities as humans is the fact that we don't need any equipment to save a life, and that our best assets can be our hands. And it's so easy to perform CPR once you know how to do it. And the hard part is actually stepping up and doing it. And especially when it's a family member, it's somebody that you love. It's not going to be just an instant um, action that you take. However, if you are trained and you know that this could happen and you know that you could step up, then you're much more likely to actually do it. And we know the statistics. We know that as minutes go by, then you're less likely to survive if somebody's has cardiac arrested. Um, so I think that the best thing that you can do is learn CPR and be willing to act, and that's the whole reason that we wrote this book.
And I
Well, that
think,
sounds
Daniel,
really
too,
interesting. Brad, you were saying?
yeah, I think to your point, around your podcast about building, really about building resiliency, right? And when you're
Absolutely.
teaching folks to be self-reliant, and it's not just self-reliancy because, you know, I think many folks just think about their core family, but they could change not just their own lives, their family's life, but they could change the life of a stranger. And then the ripple effect of what that could look like. And then building that resiliency of having the willingness, it's not just the willingness to act, but it's also the actual action. And there's a true psychology around performing those acts, and especially in crowds. And Kiera, she has a degree in psychology. She studied the bystander effects, and Kiera, you want to unpack that for a second?
Yeah, so I'm going to present a situation where it was something that I learned. But if you are walking down the street and somebody collapses due to cardiac arrest, then a crowd gathers, and say you're in a big city like Boston, where there's multiple people on the road at all times, the more people around you, the less likely is somebody to step up. And the psychological phenomenon is due to the fact that you look around and you look at somebody who could be better than you, who could be more prepared than you. But in these cases, the people who are more prepared are just the ones who know how to do it. And if you know how to do it, then you're going to be prepared enough to actually step up and do it. So I think that that's something else that is another part of the story is that you have to be able to get through the psychological phenomenon of the bystander effect and actually step up because you're capable and you know how to do it.
So you're saying if you can do it, you should take charge and do it. So with
Absolutely.
that said, though, if we have people unpacking this around the world right now, thinking about what they can do, can you tell me what are three key skills an individual or a family should have in order to be able to facilitate that first responder effect?
I think first is the awareness, right? You have to drive awareness and have situational awareness about what's going on around you, and then recognizing the signs and symptoms that there is a problem. And too many times I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is that people don't recognize the initial signs and symptoms of someone who stopped breathing and maybe doesn't have a pulse, and particularly around seizures, because it might look like a seizure, but the reality is that the body at that point is hypoxic, meaning without oxygen. And so
Right.
it might look like a seizure where the heart is not beating. It might even have some electrical activity still there, which we hope that's the case, but it's not producing a contraction of the muscle. So I think the first skill is observation and awareness and having that situational awareness around you. Then I think the
Okay.
next skill that they should really bring to the table is deciding before any emergency ever happens that if something happens, they'll be the one. Because that willingness to be the one to act is also another I think a skill that as you can develop because you need knowledge, skills, and ability to feel really, really comfortable in your skin in a sense and how you're going to act next, right? So if you don't have the training, the education, or the experiences, then you might hesitate. And that hesitation might cost a loved one their life. So I think it's not only the awareness, but it's the willingness and also that self proclaim, I'm going to be the one to make a difference. I'm not just going to stand back and watch what happens. And then I think the third thing is developing that education and skill. So having the education and then having the skill set. So there's a difference in one of the things that we're doing right now and inside of our book, The Saved Effect, you'll be able to scan a QR code and we'll give you some hands-only CPR education. And I call it education because it's not training. Training is actually physically doing the work. And then where do you develop confidence? And I think that confidence is a memory of success. Right. So you think about that in your life is how do you become confident in doing something, right? You had some knowledge, you had some skill, you had some ability, then you had experiences. And then to gain that confidence, you had this memory of success. How was I successful in this before? So it will take those individuals to not only gain the knowledge, gain the skill, the physical skill of actually doing compressions. Because Kiera really in the book talks about what it felt like the first time she did CPR on a human patient at her emergency room, the very first time that she ever did that, and that can be overwhelming for an individual. But I also think there's one more. There's one more part, not just three. I think there's four, and that last one is a commitment to being successful, wanting to win, and wanting to win for the patient, wanting to win for their family, and not giving up. So I think that drive to ensure that you have that knowledge, skill, and ability, and the willingness to not only act. So you have the situational awareness. You develop the mental acumen of I'm going to be the one to make a difference. Gain the education and skill, and um, then have that kind of drive that we're not going to give up. And that's what we see
All right.
in high performers.
That does sound good. If for the people out there that might not think they have it within them, I want you to recognize this. Your high level sports performers have muscle memory because they do it over and over. Your high level martial artists have muscle memory because they do it over and over. Your high level military personnel have muscle memory because they do it over and over. So if you want to prepare and do something for your family, you have to practice it. And that's part of what I promote all the time. Idealize what you want to do, get educated on it, and practice, practice, practice. So you're bringing it up real good. What I haven't heard you mention, well, what I've heard you mention the most though is CPR. Is that one of the big top things? Is actually the cessation of the heartbeat? Are we not worried about major blood, broken bones, and stuff like that? Or these all sort of below the CPR thing?
I think one of the main things, especially that my dad taught me, was you can't hurt somebody who's dead. And
Right.
we like to say that a lot of times, but it's very true. Broken bones and the pain that you'll cause later is only pain that they can feel when they're alive. So I think that CPR is absolutely number one because that's what's going to save their life. And you kind of hope that they're able to feel pain after it because that means that you did a good job and that you were successful.
All right. So I know everybody's not going to get your book and see that QR code. So can you tell the audience now if they're thinking, I need to do this now, and they're going to take charge now because they've made a decision to decide to act? Number two, where can they go within their community right now and start learning this material?
Sure. Either, Google the American Heart Association or the American Red Cross. Both of those are great stewards of teaching CPR, and they have a number of chapters across the country that, I'm sure you could find a CPR course near you. And if not, call your local fire department. As a fire officer, I get those calls all the time at our firehouse. And people are calling, say, hey, where can I get a CPR class? Does anybody know? And we do have a couple of folks in the area, whether it be a commercial place. And it's interesting, our EMS school, we only teach EMTs and paramedics. We actually don't have a community CPR or advanced life support type of courses that we do here. But we have some partners that we have individual will go to. But so I think either American Heart Association, American Red Cross, or call your local fire department. They certainly can help you.
All
I
right,
think
that
that
sounds good.
too.
Yeah, yes.
I think too that many churches host events where they teach CPR. Senior centers host events where they teach CPR, but also you don't need a certification to be able to do what we do, and all of those that we tell the stories of have done. You can go on YouTube and find a free video that's been sponsored by the American Heart Association or the American Red Cross that will give you the tools to be able to do that.
All right, sounds good. And for
Now,
the generation,
you just don't go on YouTube in the middle of an emergency, though.
yeah,
We,
yeah. Figure it
but
out before you
Daniel,
need to figure it out.
Daniel, we asked that we were asking this young lady, a host, and we said, okay, what would you do if your mom and dad were sitting next to you, and all of a sudden your dad stopped breathing and didn't have a pulse? would you know CPR? And she says, oh my goodness, no. And she goes, I think I'd YouTube it. And I said, can you imagine now? Hold on, I got to YouTube it. That's okay, Dad. And one of the things that's happening now, by every minute, you're decreasing survivability by 10%, right?
Right.
So as the minutes are ticking away, particularly as you dial 911, the first responders are coming, nobody's doing anything. Sometimes by the time we get there, it's too late. Their chance of
Mhm.
survivability that window has already closed. So
Because the
that
brain death has been too long, right?
correct.
Yeah.
And then so it was just kind of funny to hear her say that, and particularly around today's environment. And I said, what's the first thing that comes up on YouTube when you Google something? A commercial, right? If you're gonna watch something, and we all know it, you're like, oh,
Uh,
hold on, Dad, the commercial. I gotta wait in 30 seconds for this commercial. So
uh, well,
so be
that's
prepared.
interesting that you bring it up, but it's also very relevant. It's what I call the preparedness paradox. A lot of people don't
Mm,
prepare because it's not going to happen to me. It won't
yes.
happen here. Or if it happens, it won't be that bad. So that is a paradox I go through when I'm trying to help prepare people. Is there a similar thing you work with when you're trying to help people out?
Can you repeat that question?
Well, what are some of the barriers you have when
Okay.
trying to work with the civilian community?
I think mindset and motivation is two big barriers. Is like why should I learn this? That's number one.
Mhm.
And then can we tie that to an emotion? And this is exactly what our book is doing. Our book talks about the individuals that were saved and then what happened after they survived. We have a
Okay.
number of cases, a drowning case of a young boy who's 15 years old. We have a young girl who was 8 years old, was choking in a restaurant, who now years later, after she survived, and she's done some amazing things. We don't have time to unpack it here, but she just got into Harvard. And so what is the ripple effect of that? Her family didn't know what to do with airway obstruction. And we keep saying CPR classes. Well, it's not just CPR classes. As you know, part of a CPR class is airway obstruction. So learning the
The
Heimlich
Heimlich
maneuver,
maneuver. Yeah,
correct? So
exactly.
learning the Heimlich maneuver can be something so simple that saves a life. But when Madeline tells the story of how she's standing there, choking in this restaurant, looking at her family who love her the most, and nobody knew what to do. And if it wasn't for a stranger who was a nurse who just kind of stepped up after she recognized you had to have that recognition. She recognized that she was choking and then came over and said, let me try this. And after two thrusts, she relieved the obstruction and saved her life.
That's
So
good.
And I
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that it wasn't just that nurse who stepped forward either. I think it was also Madeline's parents who were super scared of
Oh
them.
yeah,
And
of course.
they were big enough to step aside and let this person who was so much younger than them take over a scenario that was so scary and so foreign to them. But I also want to reiterate, Daniel, what you said that people are just so fixated on the fact that they don't think it'll happen to them. But 70% of cardiac arrests happen at home, and they happen with people that love them the most around them.
Mm. Absolutely. It's interesting. You were in fire suppression for a long time. A lot of people don't recognize that the number one preventable disaster that happens every year around the country is a house fire. And the same thing won't happen to me. I don't need to prepare for that. So again, yeah, I hate to say it's an uphill battle because I think a lot more people are waking up to the fact that they do need the tool. It's best to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So your first book there, The First Responder Advantage, is about how first responders can use their tools and information as an income potential besides just being a first responder. How did you come up with that?
So we've been in business here for 16 years, and we took this startup company, grew it, sold it to a private equity group, leveraged them, forced them to give it back. They gave it back, and so I've learned so much along the way as an entrepreneur. And I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. I'm a teacher, and entrepreneurship came out of need because um, I was teaching a program. The guy didn't pay my contract, and I decided to go out on my own and open our school. Along that journey, though, I've learned some incredible things about being not only a business owner, but and as an entrepreneur. We start as a startup company, we bootstrapped our company, grew it to a multi-million dollar organization. I have 75 employees, full and part-time. So we're a good size organization, and I continue to work as a fire officer. I still work on shift. I'm a shift commander, so I still work 24-hour shifts, all while doing all these other things to help our school grow. And there were two young men who came to me and said, "Hey, Brad, can you help me? We want two firefighters on my shift, and they wanted Corbett and Joey. They wanted to learn about opening and running a company." So I invited them to
Right.
my office, and I said, "Okay, what do you guys know so far? What have you done? Have you started a LLC, or you have an S corp?" And they said, "No, we don't know anything. We need your help." And I thought at that point, as they spent the day with me, that I should write this down. But for other first responders, many first responders out there have a side hustle. They have a small business, they're doing something, but what they've never done is learned the how to either start up that business and then grow that business to reach financial freedom. Because it's very,
Hmm.
very difficult. I used to work 96-hour work weeks
Yeah.
as a first responder. I worked two full-time jobs. And even though my wife would say I still work as the same amount, but at least we're at that point in our life where one, I'm not working those 96, I'm not exposing myself to 96 hours of shifts, but I'm working in different ways and in something that is very passionate and still connected to our service. Meaning, and it's service, and it's not only just service connected, but we have an incredible mission here. We teach EMTs and paramedics so that future lives may be saved. And that to me we're built for service as first responders. And can you monetize that, right? And use those skills? Because I also think that we also make decisions differently than normal folks in society. I call them normal, right? But meaning that I come to decision making with a whole set of different tools, and particularly a
Right.
frame.
I call them the civilians.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, civilian. Yeah. But from yourself, Daniel, in the military, you understand that, right? You were taught to make decisions. I think about I make these high level cognitive decisions when time is of the essence, in extremis. And then how do you equate some of that to business without having the time compression that we need to make decisions? So I think it's been a valuable skill, and I wrote it down and I talk about it in our book. And I help. My whole goal around that was to help other first responders start up and grow a business.
Okay. Well, we're almost up on our time. That doesn't mean I don't have one more question, maybe two.
All right.
So, out of everything we've talked about today, and even something we might not have talked about, what is the one thing that you would like the listening audience to remember and act on?
I think that the biggest thing that I would want people to know is that it could happen to you. And what would you want your family members to do in this situation? But not only that, is it could happen to the person that you love most. And what would you do in that situation? And I just hope that you're prepared and you act fast.
I think the one thing
Absolutely.
that I think the one thing that we would love for everyone to take away is that the stories in our book, The Saved Effect, and you could find us at thesavedeffect.com, or if you Google Brad Newbury, Kiera Newbury, you'll find us. Is that these stories will help connect the human side of what it means to save a life, and truly what it means, and the ripple effects that can be created, and not just and it can make sure that someone's story continues and it doesn't end that day.
Right. I believe that everybody who is above ground has a story to tell to somebody, and somebody out there is waiting to listen to it. I don't know who they are or where they are, but we're about to close down. So tell me, Brad, Kira, if somebody absolutely wanted to get a hold of you right now, how could they do that?
BradNewbury.com,
All right.
KiraNewbury.com. We both have our own websites. If they want to reach out, if that goes right to me, that will go right to Kira too as well.
Okay, that sounds good. So, in closing, because that's what we're going to be doing here, real quick, I'd like our listening audience to remember preparedness is not paranoia, it is leadership before the disruption happens. And today's conversation with Brad and Kiera remind us that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they're willing to act. And with that said, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Kiera. I'm so happy you were here. And we're going
Thank you,
to
Daniel.
cut this interview now.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Daniel.
so-
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
hosting
much.
us.
Yes,
Oh, it's my
giving us
pleasure.
a platform to share our stories and to get this message out there.